This is the Rogue Insider Podcast, Episode 1. We're going to be dealing with Peter Sloterdijk today, my personal favourite philosopher. I'm V, this is W. Do you want to say hello?
Oh, hello everyone. I'm W and that's V.
So, to set this up, I read Peter Sloterdijk's Spheres trilogy. W hasn't read this, but we've had conversations about it previously. To come clean right off the bat, the purpose of this podcast is my attempt to sell to you the importance of Peter Sloterdijk. I think that the Anglosphere is doing itself a disservice by not paying enough attention to this philosophy. Now, a lot of Peter Sloterdijk's work has been translated into English, so you don't need to learn German to do this German philosophy. Is there any introductory notes that you want to make, W, before I move into the introduction?
Yes, right. Well, I wanted to identify Sloterdijk's goal just as a framing for the exploration of this material. And I've grabbed from somebody's critique of his critiques that they're summarizing his goal as restating our basic quandaries in revelatory new language. So it looks like we're addressing quandaries today. You want to lead us in?
Sure. So, I suspect that the reason why Sloterdijk is understudied in the West is not because he's not easy. To be clear, he's not easy, but just the Anglosphere is inwards facing, right? And the other reason I think is that it's impossible to sum up what Sloterdijk thinks. His books are not they're not written in a way where a single proposition is examined and then attempted to be proved or disproved, and then the outcomes of that put forward. His books take the form more like collections of essays. So each chapter is an essay about a subject, and slowly as you build essay on essay, you kind of builds towards some sort of understanding overall, whilst never quite arriving at a conclusion. And it's this failure to sum it up that I think makes it difficult, because when someone asks you, oh, Sloterdijk, I've heard of him, what's it about? Then you immediately hit a brick wall, because A, you can't remember all of the chapters that go into this book, and each of the understandings of that each chapter develops are literarily and philosophically dense enough that it already takes enough time to try and just set it up.
Could you try and articulate or summarize a trajectory, or do they vary across series of treatises?
Well, okay, so the Globes trilogy is about 2,500 pages all up across the three books. And the trajectory is from the inside to the outside. So the first book, Bubbles, is more intrapersonal and interpersonal. It starts with a consideration of the relationship of the fetus to the placenta and the womb, and then grows outwards into, the cave as this place where the family is, and then the house as the ersatz cave, and then from outwards to there, and it starts to move into the city, and then Globes addresses globalization a fair amount, and so it moves from 10,000 years ago as the sort of starting point of the trend towards globalization, and plots the trend of Western history forward through time to the present, and the way that the sphere has operated as a conceptual device in the history of Western philosophical thought, and also outwards as a kind of as the city-state turned into an empire, and the assumptions underlying empire expand outwards into the world. And then the third book, Foams, deals with what he calls the piercing of the sphere, where the larger kind of sphere, the idea that a society could have a single Weltanschauung, Weltanschauung, is that the word? A kind of worldview that pops and breaks into lots of these little parts that are all responsible for their own little bits. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So
that seems to me that like you were saying, from the inner to the outer, there's a scalar progression, and then it's sort of dipping into extra scalar.
Yeah, you could say
a
that
directional.
Yeah, well, you could say that if, to the degree that globalization starts with one person and another person having a relationship, and ends with
Relationship.
a global relationship that is the size of the entire world and involves everybody in it, and then that's the end point, and now we're after that point, that is where Foams is operating.
A multi-scalar assessment of our relational matrices.
Yeah, he's looking back on it as an event.
Okay, so that's one series of books.
Yeah, and
right.
that's what I want to deal with
consistent
today.
across other books? Okay, that's the one we're addressing.
Yeah.
Any idea of the other ones? I've heard that. Oh yeah, I've got something open. Excuse me.
Yeah. Dummerstein.
There are other books that you've covered from him, and I've referred verticality as issues he's addressing, cynicism, the nature of religion. There's other topics. Do they overlap into the Spheres trilogy so that we can address purely that? Because this is hailed as the magnum opus, isn't it? The Spheres.
Yeah, it is. It is regarded as his kind of largest and most complete work. I don't think that his other works are less complete, frankly, but in terms of his greatest achievement so far, I don't think that's too far from the truth. But yeah, he also wrote You Must Change Your Life, which I've read, which is really good, and that deals with issues that you were talking about, verticality, cynicism and religion, and these sorts of things. His work that he came to prominence with, the critique of cynical reason, is a sort of personal development of the relationship to cynicism inside the philosophical sphere that he was operating in at that time, and looking back at the failures of the social movements of the 60s and 70s. And he's written other books as well. But I'm going to try and restrict myself to speaking about the Spheres trilogy, because, I mean, this is already too much to deal with.
Oh, right. And if you're going to address, essentially it's post-Nietzschean attitudes.
It absolutely is.
Okay, well, it's too much I don't want to do Nietzsche right now.
Well, Peter Sloterdijk is an incredibly literary and deeply philosophical thinker across a range of subjects. So he absolutely deals with Nietzsche in multiple ways across the books. But you could say the same thing for Heidegger or Kant, right? It's all in there. So stylistically, it's important to note that he's an exaggerator. He makes his points by saying something that is so provocative that you have to discover what about it provokes you and dismiss those, and then once you've done that, you've arrived at the point which he was trying to make.
Like the Übermensch is a dangerous topic for a German to bring up. Superman.
Absolutely. In fact, he got into a lot of trouble for using the German word selection, which was sort of verboten. You weren't allowed to use that. So could we regard that as a provocation? I don't know if he intended it that way, but it definitely did provoke, and the way that he used it, I think, was completely ethical, because he was just saying, look, technology is coming to the point that is so good, that it is so good that at some point we're going to arrive at a point where people are not going to have the choice to not be in a position of having an influence on the way that their children come into the world, not only postnatally but prenatally as well, and you have to confront that fact. Now, obviously, in the German context, any talk of selection is extremely heightened sensitivity, and rightly so. But what else can we say about him? He has a sense of humour, which I really enjoy. Some of the parts in this series just brought me to absolute tears of laughter. It's great. And he's also literarily informed, I think I've said that. The translator, Wieland Hoban, has done really excellent work. I don't speak German, so I can't confirm the the essence of the translation, but nothing about it makes me suspect that it's inaccurate. And in terms of the readability, the difficulty comes from Sloterdijk's ideas, not from translation issues.
Right. In which case, I'm going to be addressing the material that you're sharing with us today as if it is a technology purposed for the informing of how we address technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Sloterdijk doesn't shy away from the technical or from techne at all. He's deeply involved in that question. In fact, at one moment he goes into a excursus about the space station as the ideal way to examine human life inside the technical world. So what else can we say? Sloterdijk has been said to do for space what Heidegger did for time. It's said that Heidegger invites us to take time seriously, and I would say it's accurate to say that Sloterdijk invites us to take space seriously. So he deals with architecture, because he was the rector at Karlsruhe University of Art and Design, which has a distinguished architecture school in it. Geometry he takes seriously. So all of the space and spatiality informs this approach.
Well, I'm thinking about the threat of time, and in that I, as an individual, am certainly threatened by time, and I inevitably face death. And traditionally, certainly in Western culture, and I think it's unanimous, I would find unanimity amongst all other cultures, where they see that there is some form of theory or religion or God that saves us or offers salvation to the inevitability of death. But obviously this fringes on post-Nietzscheism
absolutely
immediately.
Yeah.
And we're looking at space. What saves us from the limitlessness of space? And that is the technology that allows us to fill it.
That's right. In fact, one of the parts of Globes that really struck me is the moment of transition from the medieval universe, in which a series of nested spheres that we are within are quite closely and densely packed together, so that we can feel the heat of hell and the light of heaven onto this kind of medium world in which we live, and everything is bundled, and on the outside is God, and that is the kind of final limit of the universe, and it's all quite closely packed, and you can see the movement of the spheres and the travelers in the sky, these planets and stars and things. The moment of realization of going, wait a second, astronomically speaking, it's very clear to us that the distances that we've assumed are much bigger, and realizing that there is an outside in which the outside limit can't be found as a moment of terror. Yeah.
There's no mechanism from within space in which we can measure outside of space.
That's right.
Well, currently, with our current binding of what and definitions of what space is.
So let me go.
Okay, we have to roll it back. But before we continue that, before you persist, sorry, I would love to keep your thread, but might need to roll it back and just identify the foundational metaphor that is the sphere. Yeah, because when most of us consider a sphere or a circle, what have we got?
So, yeah, one of the things I hope to do in this podcast is identify some of the core concepts that Sloterdijk uses, so that if you choose to dive into these books, you will be less stranded than I was. And obviously the core concept is the sphere. Now, this is not a book about spheres, right? The sphere is not the subject of the books. It is the theme. So, obviously for Sloterdijk, spheres are a philosophically dense concept. He says, and I quote, "Sphere theory begins as a psychology of inner spatial formation from biune correspondences." So it starts in a place where, and this is one of the points that he makes, is that being, capital B being, is being with, that the beginning is already a relationship. So, in a sense, the entire Spheres project is to explicate, to reveal, in Heidegger's sense, to pour out what's inside, right? To find the knots of what is concealing and loosen those knots so that we can examine what's inside it. So we can find new fields of potential examination within it on the meaning of spheres. And naturally, there's always correspondences and inferences that can be drawn between and across spheres, right? A conjunction of the spheres. So let me give you an example. In the first 100 pages of Bubbles, Sloterdijk uses spheres in the following ways: microspheres, macrospheres, soap bubbles as harbours of fragility, the pre-Copernican cosmos as the nested spheres of the planets and the sidereal sphere of the stars, the celestial dome of the sky, locations where people are as an always projected sphere, humans as sphere projecting animals, being in the world as being in spheres, spheres as people relating to each other, the fragile sphere as the host of the first primal catastrophe, Eden as the sphere of paradise, the family as a sort of caring bell that encloses, the womb as a sphere that contains placenta and child, God and the world as an inclusive orb, and he quotes Nicholas of Cusa here, the whole of theology is said to be circular, Klein bottles, and the globe as the planet, the terrestrial sphere, the map, and the concept of the world. Right, so all of that is packed into the first 100 pages, and it only goes outwards from there.
Let's choose one of them. Can I choose one?
Okay. Sure.
It seems foundational. It's spheres as relation. I've already commented earlier when you dropped that word. I echoed it to you. Spheres as relationships, as relational. I want to explore that. Initially, it strikes me as, sure, there's the range of my ability to relate to other people, the sphere of my relations to others. But then, of course, there's the overlap of spheres. And immediately I've got this image metaphor, a functional metaphor. I don't know how complete it is. This is why I want to explore it.
Sure.
Of my sphere of relationships overlapping with your sphere of relationships, and where they meet and change and how they are different, because they are distinct as individuals. But there's definitely a foam forming. So is that what he's identified?
Yes. Foams has a specific... foams has a specific meaning, right? So Sloterdijk uses foams to mean the world that exists after the time of the project of globalization has come to an end because it has collapsed. Now, that is not the only use in foam, but we need to establish that that's the primary use of the metaphor of foams. And keep in mind that he's using...
one by me again?
Foams is the world, the social world that exists after the project of globalization collapses, because we arrive at a point where there's one sphere, the entire world.
The global sphere.
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
And that has dissipated. That project has ended. The project
but there's still plenty of foaming agent, and people are used to living inside of contiguous sort of bubble structures.
Exactly right. So let's say you go to watch a sports game. There's a sphere of the social world of all of the people that are there to watch that sports game at that amphitheatre or arena or whatever it is that you're at, and then it dissipates again. So the foam is not a solid thing. It's a constantly foaming thing. So... And then suppose you go to a dog show and there's lots of dogs running around, and you're in the social world of people who are interested in dog shows. They all come together in the city, and then they all dissipate again. So you end up with all of these constant arriving and dissipating spheres. And inside that, you've got, the sphere of your business that you work in, and, whatever your job is, the sphere of your family, the tiny little sphere of you inside your car. Suppose you live in an apartment. There's lots of little spheres all there. These are the foams, right? And where does all of that go back to? Sloterdijk says that the point at which the first sphere, or the first kind of co-relationship arises, is before consciousness arises in the fetal infant inside the womb.
Placenta.
You already have a relationship with the placenta, and the placenta is shaping the internal world of the child even prior to the arrival of consciousness. So this is not a matter of of, you know, your mind and your brain and what you think about things. This is a matter of even before you if you think of yourself as only your brain, which I hope that is not the case, you're already in a co-relationship. And as you are born into the world, you leave the placenta behind, and your mother becomes your ersatz placenta, because all of the reliability and nutrition and the provision that occurs for the fetus is transferred onto the mother, right? The relationship of the fetus to the placenta is the relationship of the baby to the mother, and the relationship of the person in exactly the same way is the relationship to the society.
I've never thought of my own mother as a poor substitute for a placenta before.
Well, to be clear, neither I nor Sloterdijk are saying she's a poor substitute, only that she's not the first in line. Okay, and also she built the placenta. Right. So honour to all mothers.
Okay.
Honour to all mothers.
That's right. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah. And so it's this series of multiplying mutualistic relationships that come into the world. And also I should make a point that using the word society is not really relevant to Sloterdijk's philosophy. He says sociology has two explanations for a society. One is contractualism, and the other one is organicism. And both of them are provably false with minimal effort. So that's part of the reason why the Spheres project came into being, is to try to deal with the failures of sociology or thinking about societies. So anytime I use the term society, it's an anachronism in Sloterdijk's philosophy.
What about the trajectories of society? Because we have this foundational relationship from this spheres analogy. I mean, it seems like it's so adequate, it's almost real and no longer needed to be called an analogy, but the original relationship being one of perfect giving and I'm not even sure it's symbiotic, because it seems that the placenta nourishes as the other in both a biological and spiritual, as he's identifying, relational way. Are we, in a way, it's hinting at, I mean, I haven't read this, but I'm gathering that there is a desire in me, and I imagine in others, to try and find a harmony of relationship that reflects that original perfection.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine so, right?
It seems like an innate trajectory of biology. It's so nurturing and nourishing and fosters potential, and you can see that echoed in the aspirations of man.
Yeah.
And animal.
Yeah. Well, the fact that we think of loneliness as a negative thing is all of the evidence that we need to show that humanity is inside this, what Peter Sloterdijk would call the hothouse of our closeness relationships, right? Lots of warmth. It's sort of the fecundity and moistness of the hothouse is the sort of emotional relations that we have to each other. You know, and all of that is present in the good relationship. So
there's a nice room for fantasies about hothouses there.
Oh, there's so much stuff about hothouses and glass houses in Sloterdijk. I love it. He goes into a whole technological excursus, but I won't deal with that just now. All right, so that's one of the core concepts is the sphere. So space, topology, geometry, and architecture and spatiality. Let me give you a sort of a little quote from him from Geometry and the Monstrous. If one had to pinpoint the dominant motif in the metaphysical era of European thought in a single word, it could only be globalization. The affair between Occidental reason and the world whole unfolded and exhausted itself in the sign of the geometrically perfect round form, which we still label with the Greek sphere, and even more widely with the Roman globe. It was the early European metaphysicians, mathematicians, and cosmologists who forced onto mortals their fateful new definition: orb-creating and orb-inhabiting animals. Globalization began as the geometrization of the immeasurable. So
seems like an overblown way to say when we explored the world, we found limits to it and that it had a round shape. But then again, in doing so, it leaves it open for analogy.
Yeah, I imagine a philosopher trying to convince somebody that the world is round and struggling to do so early on, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You live on a sphere.
Even now, I've had troubles in my local town. People telling me about this flat Earth and conspiracy.
But hey, it's still a live subject, right?
It turns out, almost universally, they'd taken too many drugs, discovered their inner demons, hallucinated them in such a terrifying fashion that the only way they could address it was with a story that allowed them to perceive a great evil that they were righteously fighting against. And it just so happens that that great evil is convincing us all is around Earth. But
amazing,
right?
Yeah. Okay, so another aspect of Peter Sloterdijk's style is that he takes art seriously. Now, one of the things that Sloterdijk has been praised for is the excellence of his selections of compelling images that fill the Spheres trilogy books. And he uses discussion of art pieces in a way that will be familiar for readers of art history. So
nice.
So there's a lot of the time he's using artworks. Spheres starts with a discussion of various artworks. Mosaic from the Seven Philosophers, from Torah Annunziata, which is a fresco in the House of the Vetii in Pompeii. Goethe's Altar of Good Fortune, an image from Wenzel Jamniter's Perspectiva Corporum Regularium from 1568. Albrecht Dürer's Nemesis, the Great Fortune, from 1502. Bartholomew Esteban Perez Murillo's St. Francis Embracing the Crucified Christ in 1668. Various ancient coins. Piranesi's The Roman Circus in 1756. And the 1st or 2nd century Farnese Atlas, which is currently in the Museo Nacional.
All of which I want to see right now.
Oh, they are so fantastic. They
sound beautiful.
Yeah, they really are amazing works. And
did you personally touch on art history yourself?
I have an interest in art history. Yeah, as a hobbyist, in particular, like Baroque works. They're really fantastic. So the way that he uses it, the way that he uses art is not just as example of talking about globes. Like, for example, when he talks about the Farnese Atlas, which is this globe that is being held up by what's the name of the giant that carries the world?
Atlas.
It is Atlas, isn't it? So he uses it not just as an example, but also as evidence of the fact that the people were taking these concepts seriously at the times that these artworks were produced. So when he tracks the use of the sphere as a philosophical concept through the development of Western thought, you can see how it expressed itself in these artworks.
Okay. That's it's a lot of potential in the application, and using the historical is certainly very appealing. Makes me want to see the art and understand his interpretation because of the potential for the scalar interpretation.
Yeah.
Like the micro to the macro to the extra or supra or whatever it is, the relational, the sociological. So what's that? If I grab something here from one person's critique of his work about the mental and spiritual technology that he's developing with the reconfiguration using metaphors from science. So reconfiguring the perceived world and as if the reconfiguration modality is a spiritual technology, and it utilizes sort of science references. So it's as if it's a non-religious and almost a non-offensive non-religion, but how would you say, free of anti-religious sentiment.
Mm. Yeah.
Do you have any in mind that stick out, like any science fields that he's using?
I think it is fair to say that Sloterdijk does use some scientific principles as metaphors, but more oftenly he just uses the raw science, right?
What you mean, like hothouses, climate?
Yeah. So he develops the concept of hothouses in a philosophical way, and does use them as metaphors, but then he also says, look. What was the original purpose of a lot of hothouses was for the scientific collection of plants and animals from non-European climates to survive inside European climates, right? Like that's just a raw scientific fact that is where they began. So there's nothing anti-scientific in it, but also I don't think there's anything anti-religious in it either. He takes seriously thinkers who deal with God, and because of the incredible influence of Christianity in the Western tradition, again and again he brings up artworks that what's the one that I mentioned earlier, Saint Francis embracing the crucified Christ, for example, by Murillo, right? I'm going to leave that aside because he goes into that in You Must Change Your Life. The opening for You Must Change Your Life is the kind of more deep form of that. So if you're interested in that subject, that's the place to go for it.
Well, I mean, I'd have a keen interest in the value. I mean, I've found as I age that I'm on the spectrum, not in terms of mental disorder, but in terms of conservatism, and that I'm finding myself willing to engage with traditions, even though I may not understand them, simply because as I age, I'm finding I'm starting to understand the value in why, or basically maybe there's an analogy or a metaphor in the ritualized or practiced traditions. I'm finding that my willingness to engage with them and support their existence is counter to my adolescent attitude of, I can reinvent it all. It's all here now. Why do I need this? I don't understand it, so I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
And now I'm finding I'm going to do it, and I bet I'm going to come to understand it. And if I don't, then, chances are there's something of value. And I'll let history and the nature of it having survived over time be sort of indicating its value. And that's making me a conservative in a way.
Yep.
And as such, I'm looking at Christian tradition and public speakers on the issue. I'm finding fascinating, developing my own, how would I say, becoming my own pope in a way. I'm developing an atheist Christianity and forming my own religious values. I mean, it might be atheist in a spoken word, because I certainly find myself most comfortable speaking in the materialistic frame. But certainly my internal dialogue may have other, how would you say, embellishments. So I would be interested in Sloterdijk's take on the value of traditional religion and its contribution to our state, because I'm wondering, as I become more conservative and as I see value in the culture that has built or has allowed for, how would I say, a sphere that enables certain styles of foaming or subspheres, or essentially conditions, like a hothouse, like the fecundity of the biology in a hothouse. There's a certain type of life that can exist within this sphere, and I'm wondering what it is that you find in the different religions and what it is that can be extracted, and how can we preserve that, given that we are in, it seems like, an unstoppably post-religious age.
Well, it's a big question, eh? I mean,
has it addressed it all in his books? Am I going to find that if I'm looking into them?
maybe. So let me give you. You know what? Okay, let's do. You must change your life. All right.
Okay.
This is the first paragraph of the introduction to You Must Change Your Life, and it's quite a lengthy quotation. So I hope I don't bear down on your patience too much.
Please.
A spectre is haunting the Western world, the spectre of religion. All over the country we hear that after an extended absence it is now returned, and is among the people of the modern world, and that one would do well to reckon seriously with its renewed presence. Unlike the spectre of communism, which, when its manifesto appeared in 1848, was not a returnee but a novelty among imminent threats, the present case does full justice to its revenant nature. Whether it comforts or threatens, whether it greets us as a benevolent spirit or is feared as an irrational shadow of mankind, its appearance, indeed the mere announcement thereof, commands respect as far as the eye can see. If one passes over the summer offensive of the godless in 2007, to which we owe two of the most superficial screeds in recent intellectual history, those of Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, the forces of old Europe have combined for a pompous welcome celebration for a gathering of unequal guests. The Pope and the Islamic scholars, the American presidents and the new rulers of the Kremlin, all the Metternichs and Guizots of our time, the French curators and the German sociologists. This attempt to restore to religion its attested rights involves the enforcement of a protocol which demands of the newly converted and fascinated that they confess to their previous errors of judgment. As in the first days of the first Merovingian, who pledged allegiance to the cross because of a victorious battle, today's children of the banalized Enlightenment are likewise meant to burn what they worshipped and worship what they burned.
Mm.
So yes, he strikes at exactly the root of that question. And let me be clear, without religion, either pagan or Christian, there is no realm of Western thought.
Is that book written before or after Spheres?
I believe You Must Change Your Life was written after. There's also the issue of translation. Yeah, so You Must Change Your Life was published in 2009 in German as Du musst dein Leben ändern.
Spheres was 2011, wasn't it?
No, much earlier.
Oh.
Yeah, it was published around the millennium, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just double check that. Yeah, so the first in the Spheres trilogy was published in 1998 in German.
Okay, well...
So here's another cool concept for you. Immunity. So
okay, well, immunity, right? So we're looking at one of these immunological metaphors.
Absolutely. So a key metaphor in the Spheres trilogy is immunity or immunism or co-immunism. So anywhere where there is a boundary, and spheres are boundaries, it operates like a filter. Not a word that Sloterdijk uses, I think, but like the point of a boundary is to enforce this side and that side. So that is the sense in which immunism occurs. That's where the immunity is. So immunology is the study of the hows and whys and wherefores of these boundaries. So the first kind of, an early immunism is the tribe saying, these are the people that are within our tribe and those are the people who are outside our tribe, and we need to support and protect these ones and impinge on and invade those ones. And then later on, that psychic technology of the boundary manifests itself in the physical world as the city wall, right?
Oh, nice. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so and Uruk have these very first major empire cities have these immense city walls which both project outwards as a sort of form of imposition, but also comfort inwards as a form of paternal embrace, right?
Nice.
Yeah. So let me give you another quote. This is from page 272. The proof of God's existence was given for ordinary observers wherever and for however long the wall stands. This affected the increase in the rational factor in later conceptions of the world, as God would henceforth be imagined as the builder of all builders and the artisan of all artisans. A lucid producer God of this kind offered people a chance to perceive themselves in a new light. They must have felt that a royal engineer or divine ceramicist had also produced them, and that they belonged to him more intimately than to their own mothers. They familiarized themselves with the notion that they ultimately came more from a workshop than a maternal cave. And as this sort of immune group expands outwards, you end up eventually at the point of nations, right? And then even, you could say, the post-national entities like the European Union are manifestations of this original immunity. And then when the nations lose the capacity to police their own boundary, that's where they've turned into foams.
Okay.
Yeah.
These examples are testimony to the value and validity of the overarching metaphorical system of spheres and foams. So I like that. Is the tomes, these, 2,000 pages, is it delivered with chapter segments that are addressing, this is a key metaphor and here's how the it seems a bit brutish to summarize it this way, this is how the sphere and foam analogy fits this scale, and on these scales it's relevant, or on all scales it's relevant? Is it essentially an exploration of the relevancy of this new mode of comprehension? Because a lot of what you say, it keeps ringing bells of truth. Like, I'm not going to go, that's literally true, in as much as I'm going to say, there's a big bell that goes ding, 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 that works.
Yeah.
That pattern fits. My pattern recognition systems are going, oh, I identify that follows.
Yeah, so I don't think that Sloterdijk is ever... he's really in a mode of trying to convince. It's much more often that he takes this attitude of, here's a concept. What happens if we open it up and look inside it? And also, he really lays out his project in simplistic terms. He never goes, let's understand this, and then this, and then this, and then it will become clear to us that this is the result of that. And that's part of the reason why I have such difficulty trying to explain what it is that I've learned from Peter Sloterdijk, is that to the degree that when a person learns a concept, it tends to be quite simple, and then as you develop the concept, it becomes much more textured and highly coloured, and it opens up new grounds for exploration. It's also difficult to explain what it is or why it is that way. So when that happens over and over and over and over again on domains that are either in the same place or related to each other, or have these kind of hyper-networked relationships in metaphorical and literal and emotional ways, that's the difficulty to explain. So in that sense, Peter Sloterdijk has in some sense not pioneered any new concepts. No, that's completely false. Sloterdijk says that the philosopher's primary responsibility is to pioneer new concepts.
It strikes me as if it's a human art in the exploration of philosophy, rather than some sort of mathematical Aristotelian treatise, some approach to labeling the structure in a cold way that strips away the human relation. It's as if he's using a human experience of an artistic rendering of the comprehension of how we can restate our basic quandaries in a new language. It's humanized with art.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that sometimes you cry, sometimes you laugh, you're forever astonished and completely perplexed at times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's extremely literary. Not just informed by literature, but the performance itself is in the literary mode.
Right. Have you found it revelatory yourself? Do you find yourself applying?
Yeah, absolutely. I can no longer see the world as I once saw it. My
What part of the
understanding.
world are you focusing on, though? I mean, you're a geopoliticist. Is that right?
Yeah. So geopolitics and strategy are my kind of natural home spheres, and I got into this from my dissatisfaction. Yeah. Okay. Well, if you don't mind me talking about myself a little, it feels indulgent.
Please.
But anyway, the reason why I got into Peter Sloterdijk is specifically because at the time that I was focused on globalization, I was extremely dissatisfied with the shallowness with which the concept of globalization was being treated in international relations, and that when I was in the bookstore and found globes lying there, and it says on the back, this is a philosophical development of the concept of globalization. I thought, fantastic, here's the answer to my problems. I'm going to get into this. Now,
nice.
I haven't committed the project of returning to IR and saying, here's what I've learned yet, though that may happen at some point. But that was
IR being international relations rather than industrial.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my entry
Well,
point.
currently, with your experience in international relations, is there like it's just off the top of my head, I remember something like a four-fold dimensional analysis, or like a five theory system by which you analyze international relations. Is that correct? There is something like that?
In realism, there's in offensive realism as put forward by Mearsheimer, there's a three-propositional approach, which just says you can't verify intentions. All states have some offensive capacity. Therefore, all states need to have be wary of each other, and that essentially, because there is no central authority, therefore all states are in competition with each other, and then do with that information what you will.
And so how is that improved upon by the complexity of the sphere system, the new language?
It's not, but not all international relations theorists are offensive realists.
Realists, okay.
Yeah. So to the degree that if you accept that the way that people think about the world has an impact on geopolitics, then globalization is really important. To the degree that you think that economic patterns have an impact on international relations, then globalization is really important. So
right, I'm going to need to factor for the preservation of the integrity of the boundary to my nation.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to factor in what the consequence of the globe foaming into smaller states, or the collapse of what did you say, the globalization?
Yeah.
May fail. What is it going to do? What's his concern? What's your concern in that regard?
Well, war is my concern.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, what are the potential outcomes from the fact that for 150, 200 years, there was a direct overlap between nation and state, and that created a very hard and policed sphere. Now that is in, or at least looks like it's going away, I don't necessarily believe that it's going away, and that's part of the complexity of the problem. How do you deal with the fact that it looks like we're in a post-globalization era. Is that a return to previous nationalisms, or is that inventing new nationalisms, or are the sphere of whatever the nation is going to be replaced by something else? Is the boundaries that nations used to police being penetrated? What are the outcomes of that? Or how are states going to respond to the fact that national boundaries are either being overcome or not being policed in the way that they used to? It blossoms out into a huge number of complex
Oh
problems.
my God, yes,
Yeah,
the expense of renegotiation. I come at
absolutely.
things because I'm biased by my own studies in commerce and marketing in particular,
Right.
and market theory, which we'll cover in another podcast.
We should
But
definitely need to do
essentially,
something about economy and war, but I interrupted. Carry on, please.
right, um, yeah, you did break my flow there. But if we look at what the cost is of rebranding, you can straight away see, okay, well, it's renegotiations of boundaries, and you go straight into the market as war. You go straight into the overlap between your concern for the shift of globalization into potentially, what are you saying, like nationalist states, or maybe the collapse of states, or the redefining of borders. Well, when have you ever heard of the redefinition of state borders without violence? I mean, there must be a few cases when it's implied threats of violence.
I mean, exactly.
Oh, God. Okay, right.
So,
So it's good to have a new language to address it then, to help inform those who are managing the boundaries of our state so that they can see it coming and can factor this.
well, this is,
Is that where you're coming from with the value of the book? And when you're wandering
yes.
through this library and you find it, ah, good, this gives me information that I can use to help inform my IR strategy.
Yeah, well, this is exactly my frustration.
Okay.
IR strategy is failing to address a crucial issue of our time, and the solutions are written down right here, and they are not being paid attention to. Hence my attempt to proselytize this approach to people, not because I'm arrogant enough to believe that I'm capable of saying this is correct and you should learn it, but rather to invite other people to assess it and figure out where the strengths and weaknesses are and what can be applied in a practical sense.
So he's a German
Yeah,
public philosopher,
he's a German public
public
intellectual.
personality,
And in fact, a public
intellectual.
intellectual in a way that in the Anglosphere is foreign to us. Because he ran a TV show for like 10 years on philosophy, something that I can't imagine occurring in my nation.
Well, surely that's had a significant positive influence on the nation that he's trying to assist.
Well, you would think that, but as far as I'm aware, the German self concept is already one in which pride in the sophistication of the philosophical tradition is already completely embedded. So it's more a result than a cause in that respect.
Right. So the degree to which he's going to affect change in his state's ability to adjust to a reshuffling of boundary definitions
Yeah.
is negligible because the state's already structured, or the consciousness of the people is already in such a form that it innately engages in such a way.
Well, I don't know if I would go that far. I would say that I don't think that there's any German who's surprised that a philosopher is a star in some sense. Um, but I do think that Sloterdijk's provocations do have something that is useful as a contribution to Germany. One of the one of his provocations was saying that the German state is one, or what did he call it? A lethagocracy, a state that's defined by its lethargy, in which
Oh my God.
the party that does the least is the one who is most promoted, and that the entire German system is one in which the promotion of non-action is the central kind of, if I've understood him correctly. Yeah.
Well, they've got a terrible history of extreme action. So,
Yeah, you can see why there'd be a certain amount of what do you call it, caution. Um, but that our previous discussion that we were just having about the internal about immunity and how that descends or how that operates in the world of the spheres, leads me on to another core concept, which is the air.
The
Now,
medium in which the foams exist.
exactly right. But don't
The
leave
ether.
ahead.
Okay.
So Sloterdijk
Right.
uses an
Sorry, I got
extended
excited.
metaphor of of the air as the internal world of these spheres, right? So to the
The
sense that
internal world.
yeah,
Sorry, inside the sphere is air as well as out?
the air is only inside the world, only inside the sphere, right? So
Okay.
if we imagine a child blowing a soap bubble, the sphere is inflated. Now, when a sphere is inflated in the sense that we mean it, of this kind of policed boundary of a internal social world, what is the air that is inflating that? Right? If people are part of a self-hypnotizing process of cultural production, reproduction, and re-self-fascination, then the major collective cultural product is the internal air of these cultural spheres. Does that make sense?
Sure, but you're asking me what the air is, and the only word I can think of is righteousness.
Well, I think that it's indisputable that in the age of empire, righteousness was absolutely an aspect of the reproduction of these cultural spheres, right? Without the justification for the inflation, it wouldn't have been occurring.
Right.
Yep.
Well, even in my own life, am I going to do this today? How much sugar do I want in my coffee? I feel quite righteous about getting that particular.
Yeah. So I think that is a crucial aspect of it, but I interpret the air as being like a kind of cultural production and the sort of refascination. And Peter Sloterdijk uses this metaphor of the air over and over again. In fact, he ends the Globes book with this concept that is, with a statement that is extremely hard to pass unless you're familiar with the rest of it, where he says that, how does it go? It's a statement about the air. Yes, here he says, air conditioning will establish itself as the main space political theme of the coming era. So,
Space political.
Yep. So in terms of the sort of embodied in the world, spatial kind of architectural aspect of politics, the capacity for people to produce culture and condition the air in which they live is going to be critical, he says. And that metaphor is extended into the literal sense in terms of climate change, right? We need to extend, we need to have some, there's something relevant there. But also, like, in a literal sense, like any person that works in a large building is dwelling inside an air-conditioned space. And in this sense, so air-conditioned literally and also metaphorically.
Well, how many other layers of truth are there? By my understanding, the literal, the symbolic and metaphorical, the esoteric and the mystic. Is he covering the esoteric? He is, isn't he? He's looking at art history.
He definitely deals with the symbolic. My understanding of esoteric is it's like elite teachings. So I suppose in the sense that philosophy is a luxury consumer good, you could say it's esoteric, sure.
Well, not to be confused with erudite. I mean, he's clearly erudite in that he's heavily studied and knows his material well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so perhaps it's not relevant when delivering material for the mass. It's more important to focus on a new language with metaphors and analogies and sort of a transcendent capacity to address the literal. Nice. Our basic quandaries. Now, what do you have as a basic quandary, V? What's a basic quandary of yours?
Oh,
I mean, feel free to return the question,
well,
but the idea being we can apply his system to addressing it or developing a new language for it.
well, it sounds like the person who's criticizing Sloterdijk's critique is talking about basic human quandaries, right? Like, what does it mean to be in the world and that kind of thing.
Yes.
How do we orient ourselves and that sort of stuff. So one of the contributions that Sloterdijk makes is overcoming the concept of the network. He says that the metaphor of a network is massively overused and is not very philosophically useful. So if we replace the network with foams, because that includes spaces in which we can be, whereas networks are only nodes and the connections between them. There's no space for us there. So that's one major contribution that he makes.
Well, if I'm not part of a network, but I contribute to the air, then it allows me to at least feel relevant.
Yeah, and that's, in fact, there's another useful concept that he brings up here, tensegrity, which I had to look up. Tensegrity is the idea of a structure that is held in place by the mutual pressures on and between the parts. So in the 80s, there was a bunch of art structures that were made using tensegritous principles, that because all of the parts lean on each other. So when we apply this to foams, the spheres are held in place because the spheres touch each other and they are pressured on each other. And we should not think of the spheres as, of these borders between the spheres inside the foam, as not being penetrable, right? Like if you live in an apartment building, you are inside the air of the sphere of your particular apartment, but the fact you share a boundary wall with the apartment nearby, so when they argue or fuck or whatever it is, the noise comes across and influences your domain. So all of the spheres inside the foam are all held in place through tensegrity and all kind of influencing each other and all bubbling up against each other and that kind of thing.
Hmm. To shift back to commercial analogies, you have holistic network or relationship network marketing. And that would be the attempt, from what I understood when I was in school. It may have since evolved since these texts of spheres are out, but with Sloterdijk. But you've got holistic networks, so you're attempting to define what is encapsulated by the spherical analogy and metaphor. You're attempting to define it with more difficult, incomplete metaphors. Here's a network. The network's incomplete, so we're going to make it holistic, and we're going to include these outside influences, and then we're going to tack on it's to do with relationships between them, because it's not just about the nodes, it's about the exchanges between the nodes. So we've got the network, we've got the nodes, we've got the traffic between the nodes, and then we've got the influence of the environment and the ecos. So all of a sudden you're just fracturing into a whole bunch of analogies and metaphors and then slapping them together and trying to make and including holistic, ironically, using holistic as a part of it to try and create a holistic system. Whereas it sounds to me, and in terms of my ability to use the visual comprehension, it's as if spheres and foams are utilizing the visual nature of thought more effectively.
Mm. Well, I definitely feel like foams is a richer metaphor than network, and in that sense, useful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I find a lot of my thinking is in pictures. When I was discussing this with my daughter, when I was asking her, and I love the innocence of a child's mind, to ask her, what is a memory and how do you record them? And our conclusion was it's kind of like a comic book in that we are recording details of an image and the feelings we have of those images. And then when we draw upon that memory, we're pulling up those images and recreating the feelings, just like an allusion to those feelings. Obviously, allusion is probably beyond her, but I'm summarizing here, paraphrasing.
Yep.
And then from that, we recreate the story, and then we put the story back into words. And that she claims she's not storing her memories in words, and they're just part of how she patterns. And so it's a good opportunity for me to leave her into, or head into, talking about the different hemispheres of the brain and what functions they perform. But certainly, I like the idea of being able to imagine or think in images. And I know that a lot of psychotherapy and psychological support techniques use what's a right brain therapy, where you may, if somebody has a problem that they can't seem to figure out, in pain in their body, for example, and you ask, well, if you go to that part of your body, what does it feel like? Allow yourself not to think in words, but just allow yourself to see it, and imagine it. Is it a shape, or is it a color? Is it dense, or is it soft? Is it moving? Is it still? And some people say, oh, it's like a brown blanket hanging over my shoulder. Maybe they got like a stiff neck or something, and there's an emotional link to it. And then there's a hypnotic technique where you hand the individual, you say, open your hands and I'll give you this precious gift, which is the perfect gift for dealing with that. And when they're in that hypnotic state, then they imagine the perfect gift to resolve it. And so for them, they might be, oh, it's a 4-leaf clover. And well, what do you do with the 4-leaf clover? I hold it against my heart. And then maybe they then all of a sudden you go, well, how does your shoulder feel now? It's, oh, it feels different. It's as if there is an image. Well, the truth is there is. It's not just as if. There's an image thought process that is able to interpret a much richer. A picture tells 1,000 words. They can spend the rest of the session in therapy describing what that 4-leaf clover meant to them and coming to conclusions about why it worked and what was relevant about it. But the fact is that 4-leaf clover was there instantly, and it carried with it such a depth of meaning and significance that it created a physiological and psychospiritual solution. And it was utilizing the image mind, what they say the right brain, as opposed to the logic of the left. And I think that using an apt metaphor or analogy system like spheres and foams is a very impressive way to set about addressing and improving the human capacity to address the problems of the world.
Yeah, I think it's extremely useful. I mean, I definitely get the hunch that my memories are an embodied physical, emotional experience that the rational mind reconstructs from that information. You know, the kind of more banal parts of what a memory is.
Right. Should we wrap up the session? How are we at for time?
What are we at? An hour and 7?
Yeah, our session's probably good for a first
Okay.
episode.
Yep, nice one. Okay, talk to you later, W.
Nice one, V.